The chair beneath Sophia Caldwell had never felt so uncomfortable, and she was certain it had nothing to do with the upholstery. Hargrove and Associates sat on the 14th floor of a downtown Charlotte high-rise, all glass and polished steel on the outside, all rot and deception on the inside. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, drumming an anxious rhythm that matched the pulse in her throat. The office smelled of mahogany polish, aged paper, and something else entirely. Something she couldn't name, but immediately recognized. The smell of a lie waiting to be told. Gerald Hargrove sat across the wide desk with the kind of practiced ease that took years to perfect. A tall white man in his mid-50s, silver hair slicked back with deliberate precision, cufflinks catching the overhead light as he steepled his fingers together. His suit was charcoal and sharp, every crease intentional. His smile was the most dangerous thing in the room. It was too comfortable, too rehearsed. On her left sat her older brother Raphael, 34 years old, broad-shouldered and unreadable, the kind of man who kept his storm locked behind a wall of silence until he was ready to use it. On her right sat Matteo, just 12, their youngest brother, dark-eyed and alert, his small hands pressed flat against the outside of his hoodie pocket, hiding something that none of them had spoken about yet. Their father, Ernesto Caldwell, had been gone for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since they'd buried a man who had spent 40 years turning nothing into something real. Trucking routes across 6 states. A chain of storage facilities from Charlotte to Raleigh. 2 restaurant locations that were practically neighborhood institutions. A man who had crossed into this country with $40 and a duffel bag and had built a life that his children would never have to apologize for. And now this man, this polished and smiling man, was about to tell them it was all gone. Hargrove cleared his throat softly, adjusting the folder in front of him with unhurried fingers. "I believe you are already aware," he said, voice smooth as river stones, "that your father's accounts were entirely empty before his passing." The words landed like a physical blow. Sophia felt Raphael go rigid beside her. Matteo's fingers tightened against his pocket. Empty. She turned the word over in her mind the way you'd turn over a stone, expecting to find solid ground, and finding only mud. Ernesto Caldwell's finances, empty. The man who had personally written checks for property taxes on 4 different addresses last spring. The man who carried a ledger in his jacket pocket because he didn't fully trust digital records. The man who had once driven 8 hours round trip just to pay a business debt in person because he believed a man should look you in the eye when money exchanged hands. Empty. Raphael's voice came out low, each syllable deliberate. "That's not possible. Our father built everything from zero. He owned real estate, a fleet of trucks, 2 restaurants. Are you telling us that all of it just evaporated?" Hargrove sighed, the sound soft and practiced, full of manufactured sympathy. He slid a thick folder across the desk with the slow, theatrical confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. "I'm afraid so. Poor investments, accumulated debt, legal liabilities. These things have a way of compounding over time. The picture can change rapidly in the final years. You'd be surprised how quickly a ship like your father's enterprise can take on water." Sophia leaned forward, her elbows pressing into the edge of the desk. "Funny thing about that," she said, her voice quiet but precise. "Because 2 months before he died, I sat across from him at the kitchen table while he reviewed statements from 3 separate banking institutions. He was collecting rent on 2 commercial properties in Concord and 1 in Gastonia. He had no debt claims on record. Not 1 lien. Not a single pending lawsuit that I was aware of. So either your paperwork is wrong, or you're sitting here telling us our father's estate vanished between a Tuesday and his funeral." Something moved behind Hargrove's eyes. Fast. Small. A crack no wider than a hairline, sealed over almost instantly with another practiced smile. "Appearances can be deceiving, Miss Caldwell. Your father was a proud man. He wouldn't have wanted you to know the full extent of his financial troubles. Many of those properties carried heavy mortgages. The trucking operations alone were hemorrhaging money in the final quarter. Health costs, outstanding legal fees. It adds up." Matteo sat still and quiet, but his mind was anything but. His father's voice was in his ears the way it had been every day since the funeral. The last real conversation they'd had, just the two of them, sitting in his father's study on a Tuesday afternoon while Ernesto pressed that worn brown envelope into his hands. If something feels wrong after I'm gone, you'll know exactly when to open it. Trust what you feel, Mijo. You'll know. Mateo pressed his fingers against the shape of the envelope through the fabric of his hoodie and waited. Raphael flipped through the folder, his eyes moving across the pages with the focused intensity of a man who had spent 15 years as a site supervisor and knew how to read a document. The pages were dense with legal language, columns of figures, and neatly printed references to debt obligations and write-downs. Almost too neat, like something assembled in a hurry to look like something assembled over years. And the will, Raphael said, his voice rising just slightly at the edges. The formal will he had notarized 14 months ago. Where is it? Hargrove adjusted his position in his chair, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his lapel. Ah, the will. Regrettably, when an estate carries no substantive assets, the will becomes largely ceremonial. And I must tell you, the original document has unfortunately been misplaced during our internal filing transition. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Sophia stared at him. Raphael closed the folder with a sound like a crack of thunder. Mateo felt his pulse in his fingertips. Misplaced. A notarized legal document belonging to a dead man misplaced. Raphael placed both palms flat on the desk and leaned in. Let me make sure I understand you correctly. A man who operated 2 restaurant locations, held leases on multiple commercial properties, ran a regional trucking company with a fleet of 18 vehicles, and maintained accounts with 3 separate financial institutions, has left behind nothing. No assets. No will on record. And you want us to accept that? Hargrove didn't lean back, but something in his posture tightened. Business valuations shift. Debt obligations, penalty clauses, personal health expenditures. I assure you, every number in that folder is accurate. Then show us, Sophia said, her voice dropping to something colder than anger. Show us the mortgage statements. Show us the lawsuit filings. Show us itemized health expense records. Right now, while we're sitting here. Hargrove reached toward the desk, fingers moving across a stack of papers with the exaggerated patience of someone performing calm they no longer felt. Certain files are currently under review, he said, after a pause that stretched 2 full seconds too long. Confidentiality protocols restrict what I can release without formal written request. Convenient, Raphael said, and the single word carried the full weight of what he wasn't yet saying. Mateo watched Hargrove's hands. He watched the way the man's left thumb pressed against his index finger when he paused. His father had taught him to watch hands. Hands always gave people away before their faces did. He thought of the note. He thought of the drive. He thought of the way his father had looked at him that Tuesday afternoon. Not sad exactly, but purposeful. Like a man who had already decided something and simply needed to pass it on. Sophia shifted in her chair and tried a different angle. Mr. Hargrove, 10 days before our father's death, I personally drove him to the county assessor's office in Mecklenburg County to process his annual property tax payments. All 4 properties, paid in full. I sat in the waiting room while he did it. There were no liens. There were no active legal claims. There was not a single delinquent notice on any account. So you'll understand why I'm having difficulty accepting your version of events. Hargrove's jaw moved slightly. Not enough to call it a flinch, but enough. Your father may not have disclosed the full scope of his private financial arrangements, even to family. It is not uncommon. Or, Sophia said, holding his gaze, you're lying to us. The accusation didn't echo. It didn't need to. It settled into the room like smoke, invisible and everywhere. Raphael said nothing. He just looked at Hargrove, the kind of look that doesn't ask a question so much as deliver a verdict. Mateo felt the moment arrive. He could feel it the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm breaks. But he held himself still. Not yet. One more. Just one more. Sophia delivered it. Final question, Mr. Hargrove. If there is genuinely nothing left of our father's estate, if every account is empty and every property is mortgaged into oblivion, then why have you contacted us 3 separate times this week requesting that we sign settlement papers? What exactly are we settling if there's nothing there? Hargrove's smile didn't vanish. It crumbled. It came apart in stages, from the corners first, then the center, until what was left wasn't a smile at all, but the memory of one. For just a moment, something raw moved behind his eyes. Something that looked unmistakably like fear. And Mateo knew. Right then, with complete certainty, sitting in that heavy chair in that cold office while rain beat against the windows of Charlotte's skyline, he knew it was time. He slipped his hand into his hoodie pocket, fingers closing around the envelope. He didn't open it yet. He waited while Hargrove forced another cough and reached for a new stack of documents, trying to steer the conversation back to ground he controlled. Perhaps it would be better, Hargrove offered, voice thin now, if we scheduled a follow-up meeting once you had time to process everything. Raphael wasn't listening anymore. Neither was Sophia. Mateo carefully slid the envelope out from his pocket beneath the table, turning it over in his hands. His father's handwriting ran across the front in thick, slanted strokes, the letters slightly pressed like a man who wrote with intention. Only open when you know you cannot trust them. Mateo looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then he opened it. He tore carefully along the fold, the envelope parting quietly beneath the table while Hargrove continued talking above it. Inside were 2 things: a small black flash drive no longer than his thumb, and a piece of notebook paper folded into thirds with the kind of neat precision his father applied to everything. He unfolded the note with steady fingers. His father's voice came through every word as clearly as if the man were sitting beside him. "Mijo, if you are reading this, then my instincts were right, and I did not trust Gerald Hargrove for good reason.
Everything you need is on that drive.
The proof is there. Protect your brother and your sister. Bring what is true into the light where it belongs. I love you more than I could ever write down. Your father." Mateo read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and pressed it against his chest for just a moment before tucking it back into his pocket alongside the drive. His father had known. He had mapped the betrayal out in advance the way he mapped trucking routes, accounting for every variable, planning every contingency. And he had chosen Mateo. Not Raphael, who was the oldest. Not Sophia, who was the sharpest. Mateo, the youngest, the quiet one, the one no one would expect. Because Hargrove hadn't looked at Mateo once since they'd entered that office. Not really. He had looked through him the way adults look through children when they decide children don't matter. That invisibility was exactly what his father had counted on. Across the desk, Hargrove was pushing a new document toward Raphael and Sophia, his voice picking up pace, the words coming faster now, pressed tight together. Just formalities. Simple acknowledgement of estate closure. Nothing binding in any way that concerns your individual rights. Sophia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping back. "We are not signing a single page today." Raphael placed his hand flat over the document. "Not without an independent audit of every asset our father ever held. Not without the original will. Not without full disclosure." Hargrove's composure was cracking visibly now, thin lines of stress appearing at the corners of his eyes. "Miss Caldwell, Mr. Caldwell, the longer this process is delayed, the more administrative costs will accumulate. I'm advising you as a matter of fiduciary responsibility to proceed efficiently." "Mateo," Sophia said, glancing over with a sudden shift in her voice, softer now, deliberate. "Why don't you step into the hallway for a few minutes?" Mateo was already moving. He stood, nodded once, and walked quickly out of the office and into the corridor. The reception area outside was briefly empty, the desk attendant apparently away from her post, a company laptop sitting open and unattended, its screen glowing softly in the low hall light. Mateo's breath caught. He crossed the space in 4 steps, looked both ways down the corridor, saw no one, and sat down in front of the keyboard. He pulled the flash drive from his pocket and plugged it into the USB port on the side of the laptop. The screen blinked. One file appeared. A single video file labeled Hargrove Private Consultation, recorded 14 days prior. Mateo's hands were trembling slightly as he clicked play. He pressed the volume down to a whisper and leaned close. The image that filled the screen was grainy and slightly off-angle, but perfectly legible. His father's study in their Charlotte home. The dark wooden desk. the framed photograph of the family mounted on the far wall. And there, seated in the leather chair across from where the camera must have been hidden, was Gerald Hargrove. Leaning back, one leg crossed over the other, smiling the same smile he'd been wearing all morning. His voice carried through the laptop's speaker with ugly ease. "Come on, Ernesto. Be realistic here. The others won't notice what isn't in front of them. You hand it over to me. I structure everything through the holding company. No one asks questions, no one gets hurt. A man in your position shouldn't want his estate tangled up in probate disputes. You sign the transfer authority over to me now, and everything moves cleanly." Then Mateo heard his father's voice.
Calm. Certain.
The voice of a man who had already decided exactly how this conversation was going to end. "If you genuinely believe I would allow you to strip this family of what they are owed because of who they are and where they come from, then you have never understood a single thing about me, Gerald. Not one thing." Hargrove's smile had shifted in the recording, something colder entering it. "You won't always be the one making the decisions, old man." The video froze. Hargrove's face locked in that expression, smugness edging toward something darker. Mateo sat back from the screen. His chest was tight, his eyes dry, his jaw set in a way that felt very much like his father's jaw. He had everything.
Fraud.
Coercion. A direct recorded admission of intent. His father had set this trap with patience and precision, knowing exactly how the man across that desk would behave, knowing that greed would make a person incautious, knowing that Hargrove had never once considered that the quiet child in the corner might be carrying something the man had no defense against. Mateo ejected the flash drive, tucked it deep into his front pocket, and walked back to the office with measured steps. Not rushing, not giving a single thing away. He opened the door quietly and returned to his seat. The room was electric. Raphael was standing now, leaning over the desk, hands braced against the edge. Sophia sat back in her chair with her arms crossed, watching Hargrove with a kind of focused stillness that preceded something decisive. Hargrove was pressing a handkerchief to the corner of his mouth, his composure wearing down to something thin and brittle. "Mr. Hargrove," Raphael said, his voice dangerously even. "You are asking this family to sign away any claim to our father's estate without producing the original will, without providing documented financial records, and without allowing us time to engage our own legal counsel. I want you to explain to me, very clearly, how that constitutes ethical legal representation." "Standard estate closure protocol," Hargrove said, but his voice had lost its shine. "The sooner you move forward, the cleaner the resolution. Any delays only benefit the creditors, not your family." "The only person this benefits," Sophia said, her eyes never leaving his face, "is you." Mateo looked up at Sophia, a small, deliberate movement of his chin, the kind of signal that only existed between siblings who had grown up reading each other across crowded dinner tables. Sophia caught it immediately. She straightened in her chair. "Actually, Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice shifting into something precise and deliberate, "before we leave today, my brother has something he'd like to share." Hargrove raised an eyebrow, the practiced curiosity of a man who had not yet understood that the trap had already closed. "And what would that be?" Raphael reached over and drew the receptionist's laptop onto the desk. Mateo stood, pulled the flash drive from his pocket and plugged it in.
Hargrove saw it.
And in the half-second before his expression rearranged itself, Mateo watched the man understand. His hand moved toward the desk, toward the papers, toward something. Raphael's voice landed like a wall. "Don't." The file opened. The video began to play. Hargrove's own voice filled the office, rolling out of the laptop speakers with perfect, damning clarity. "Come on, Ernesto. Be realistic here. The others won't notice what isn't in front of them." Hargrove's face went the color of old chalk. The sound of his own voice, dispassionate and certain, kept rolling. "You sign the transfer authority over to me now, and everything moves cleanly." Then Ernesto's voice, and every person in that room who had loved him felt it like a hand pressed against their sternum. Raphael's fists tightened at his sides. Sophia's mouth became a flat, hard line. Mateo sat perfectly still, watching Hargrove's face with the calm attention of someone who had already processed his grief and arrived somewhere much more focused on the other side of it. You won't always be the one making the decisions, old man. The screen froze. Silence poured into every corner of the room. Hargrove sat motionless, the polished performance of 40 years of practiced authority dissolving in real time. Mateo spoke. His voice was quiet and unhurried and carried the full weight of everything behind it. My father knew you would do this. He knew exactly what you were planning, and he trusted me to make sure you never got away with it. Hargrove blinked. Something was moving in his face, something that wasn't strategy or calculation. It was panic. You don't understand what you're doing. You're children. You don't know how any of this functions. We know enough, Raphael said. Sophia already had her phone in her hand. And shortly, so, will the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department. Hargrove's mouth opened. Nothing came out. There was no version of this he could talk his way through. He had been recorded confessing. He had been caught by a 12-year-old boy sitting quietly in a chair he had dismissed entirely, and there was nothing left in his arsenal that could change that. The office door swung open hard. Every person in the room startled, heads turning. It was not a secretary. It was not building security. It was Deputy Chief Warren Okafor, a large black man in a press department uniform, badge catching the overhead light, flanked by 2 officers. His presence was calm but total, the way authority looks when it doesn't need to perform. Raphael had placed the call quietly while Mateo ran the recording. Hargrove pushed back from his chair, hands raised, voice climbing into something close to desperation. This is a misunderstanding. I am their legal representative. Whatever they've told you, they've mischaracterized an entirely routine conversation. Okafor regarded him without expression. He reached into his jacket and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Gerald Hargrove, you are being placed under investigation for estate fraud, forgery of legal documents, and criminal conspiracy to defraud multiple beneficiaries of the Caldwell estate. The 2 officers moved behind Hargrove with quiet efficiency. Hargrove stepped sideways, hands out. You have no basis for this. Whatever is on that drive is inadmissible. I want my attorney. Your attorney, Sophia said, arms folded, voice like cool marble, is currently in handcuffs. The cuffs went on with a clean metallic snap. Hargrove's voice rose sharply. They fabricated this. They set me up. I was trying to protect the estate. Okafor leaned slightly forward, voice low and flat. We have you on tape, Mr. Hargrove. In your client's own home. In your own voice. Advising him to sign over estate authority under coercion. Under the law, that recording constitutes direct evidential admission. The room that had been Hargrove's territory for 20 years, his leather chair, his mahogany desk, his tailored performance of authority, was now a crime scene. He was walked toward the door with his hands behind his back and his composure in pieces on the floor. In the reception area outside, 3 clients who had been waiting for scheduled appointments stood and stared. 2 of them raised phones. Someone near the front window said something in a low voice. The story was already moving, the way stories do in cities where people pay attention, passing from mouth to mouth faster than anything printed could follow. On the sidewalk outside the high-rise, the rain had thinned to a mist. Hargrove was guided into the back of a police vehicle, his silver hair no longer quite so precise, his expression no longer quite so controlled. He looked out through the window as the door closed, and Sophia was the last thing he saw before the car pulled into traffic. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Outside on the pavement, the 3 Caldwell siblings stood together for the first time without the weight of that office pressing down on them. Raphael placed his hand on Mateo's shoulder, gripping it firmly. You held on to that the entire meeting, he said. Through all of it. Mateo nodded, looking down at his shoes for a moment. Dad said I'd know when. Sophia looked at her younger brother, and there was something in her expression that wasn't just pride. It was recognition. The acknowledgement of someone seeing a person clearly, perhaps for the first time.
He was right about you, she said.
He always was. That evening the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table in the house their father had owned for 19 years. The table was old and solid, its surface marked with the small histories of a family, the ring from a coffee mug, a long scratch from a dinner years ago, initials pressed into the wood along the underside of the lip where their father had let Matteo carve his name when he was 6 and thought no one was watching. The flash drive sat in the center of the table. Deputy Chief Okafor had taken a copy for the investigation, but the original was theirs. The estate was intact. The trucking company, the storage facilities, the restaurants, the properties in Concord and Gastonia, the savings accounts that Hargrove had spent months constructing false debt records to obscure. All of it belonged to them. The independent auditor Okafor recommended had already confirmed what they had suspected. The debt documentation in that folder was fabricated, assembled from template language and backdated reference numbers. Hargrove had been systematically siphoning records and preparing a false estate closure that would have transferred liquidated asset proceeds directly into a private holding structure with his name on it. Their father had figured it out. He had installed a small camera in his study, the kind of device sold online for home security, positioned behind a bookend on the shelf to his left. He had asked Hargrove to come to the house for a consultation. He had let the man talk. He had let him expose himself entirely. And then he had compiled everything onto that drive and given it to his youngest child in a plain brown envelope with instructions written in thick, slanted handwriting. Matteo unfolded the letter again and read it for the 3rd time that night, his fingers moving lightly over the surface of the paper the way you trace the outline of something you want to memorize. Raphael watched him from across the table. "He didn't give it to me," he said quietly, not with bitterness, but with the genuine curiosity of a man who is still processing it. "Or to Sophia. He gave it to you." Matteo looked up. "He said no one was going to watch me. He said the best place to hide something important was with the person everyone underestimated." Sophia laughed, short and real, the first real laugh any of them had allowed themselves in weeks. He was absolutely right about that. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the last of the evening lights stretched in wide orange bands across the Charlotte skyline, long and horizontal above the rooftops, the kind of light that looks like something ending and something opening at the exact same time. Matteo tucked the letter back into his pocket, the same pocket where the flash drive had rested through all of it, through the cold office and the careful performance, and the moment the whole thing finally broke open. He thought about his father sitting in that study, alone, the camera running, listening to a man confirm everything he already knew. He thought about his father sitting at this table afterward, writing that letter by hand, folding it into thirds, pressing it into an envelope, and deciding which of his children to trust with it. He thought about what it meant to be chosen, not because you were the oldest, not because you were the loudest or the most prepared or the most visibly capable, but because your father had watched you your whole life and understood something about you that the rest of the world had not yet bothered to see. The truth had always been the most powerful thing in the room. It had sat in his pocket through every lie Hargrove had told, through every fabricated document and every practiced smile, patient and complete and waiting for exactly the right moment. His father had known that. He had built his life on it. And now, sitting at that old kitchen table with his brother's hand on his shoulder and his sister's voice still warm in the air between them, Matteo understood that the thing his father had really left behind wasn't the properties or the business accounts or even the truth on that flash drive. It was this. The 3 of them here, still standing, still together, still his.